I'm Joshua.
Hi, I'm Miranda.
Hi, I'm Maya.
We're the Youngs.
We've spent our lives traveling the world.
And in 2018, we moved from
Chicago, Illinois to
Copenhagen, Denmark.
Now we want to share with you
how our new lives abroad
is keeping us young.
keeping us young.
are helping to keep us young. A lot of people ask us why we moved here. Well, it really wasn't because of politics or anything. We just moved here because we wanted to experience something different. We traveled a lot of different places around the world, and we always felt like having the chance to live somewhere for real and not just traveling for a week, but actually living would be an amazing experience for us and for Maya that we wanted to be able to give to her. So we decided that we'd try to see if we can find a way to move overseas.
My dad got a job in Denmark, and then we all came here. I was really excited at first, and I didn't see any cons to anything. And then I came here and I started noticing them, but after a while it got better.
We have always wanted to live abroad. We've traveled a lot and always talked about living abroad, and Josh was looking to change his job, and so he decided that he was going to go to this convention that he always goes to and just kind of talk to some of the people there to see if there were any opportunities abroad. And he got put into contact with a partner here in Denmark, and they started talking, and then all of a sudden it was such a whirlwind that he went out for an interview, and it just every week it got closer and closer, and we couldn't believe it that it was happening, and then it did, and it was just crazy.
We didn't originally decide specifically on Denmark. I spent a lot of time building a network with my job and with people that I worked with around the globe. And through that network, I built a lot of friendships from people in the Netherlands and in Denmark and Australia, various places around the globe. And I just reached out to them. I was at a conference that most of them were at, and I asked them, I said, hey, what opportunities are out there? So I think the most critical thing is I kept an open mind and just kind of thought, whatever seemed the best opportunity, not necessarily the best place. And everything just kind of came together with Denmark. We had traveled here before for a week on vacation. I'd been here for work a couple times also with my old job. So I wasn't completely foreign to the idea of coming to Denmark and Copenhagen. So it was a good fit in that I had some friends here already from work. And it just lined up and it made sense.
So the moving part was quite difficult for me. Logistically, because I was still working full-time. I worked full-time until I had to leave for Denmark, and Josh actually left a month before we did, and he was still traveling quite a lot before he left. So a lot of that fell on me to take care of the house and make sure everything was getting done, and it was super stressful. And then when he was just totally gone, that was really stressful, because that was like the height of, we had to get everything out of the house, we had to get everything packed, we had to get the cars sold, and it was just all these things had to happen, and it all had to happen at once. And so it was really stressful for me.
Before we left, we didn't officially know that we were moving here until February, so a few months before we left. So I remember I tried really hard for my classes, because I was about to graduate middle school, so that I could get into advanced classes in high school in case we went. And then I remember spending as much time with my friends as possible, so that if I did leave, it would feel worth it, and that I spent a good amount of time with them.
It's not really possible to come to Denmark looking for a job. You need to already have a job lined up in order to get a visa that allows you to be here and work. So I had met some people, as I said, and I talked to them and found an opportunity, and I flew out here for an interview, but I'd already had an opportunity in process. I didn't just move to Denmark looking for a job. I was still living in the US. And I just came here briefly for an interview because I'd already set everything up before I got here. We didn't begin living in Denmark until we had the visa and everything in place for us to actually legally live here. Because you can't really come and live here legally looking for a job. You have to already have that in place. we had to take care of everything on the side in the US. So we had to sell our house, we had to arrange for the movers, we had to pack everything up ourselves, we had to make sure everything got on the big truck okay that was going to be shipped overseas. Nobody helped us with that. Everything with our dogs. We had 2 dogs and a cat that we brought.
I mean, just having all of our stuff like on a boat and our pets in the bottom of a plane is kind of interesting. And the journey it took to get them all here, it was very chaotic.
Another thing that was really difficult was trying to figure out how to get our pets over, because we had an ancient cat that we had forever, Moose. He was 17 at the time that we moved, and Elsa, who I think was 10, and Bacon, who was 6. And Bacon was my dog. He was my baby, and I loved him so much. But he was massive. He was so huge, and we could not find a crate to fit him. And he was running up against basically every regulation on airlines for shipping animals over. He was just like right at the edge of even being able to get him on a plane. And I was beside myself trying to figure out how we could do it. And at one point I remember looking into having friends take care of him and just giving him to a friend, because I was so worried that we just wouldn't be able to take him. And I remember just being in bed and sobbing, crying, because we couldn't figure out how to get him over. But we did finally find somebody who could build him a custom crate and get him over. A lot of people come over with their pets, but I don't think they come over with really big pets. And so that's a fascinating experience.
One of the interesting parts of the move was actually managing 2 dogs and a cat. One of our dogs was like the size of an elephant, it seemed like, to the people in the airport. And we wanted to make sure that they flew on the exact same plane as us. In order to do that, I had to book our ticket and call SAS immediately after buying to make sure there was room for them, because they only let so many animals on a plane at once. And we had 3. And it's also based on weight, and they're quite heavy because one of them was so big. He was a big coonhound. And so there was all these steps that we had to go through in order to ensure that they could be on the plane. We had to get crates for them that were a specific size. If you get on like the SAS website, every airline has regulations on how large the crate needs to be in terms of making sure the animal has enough room to move while they're in the crate. And so we had to get a custom one made for Bacon because he was so big. So we had to get these done. We had to go through and get special shots. We had to get them chipped because they weren't chipped before. We had to get paperwork that would be signed and like stamped by the FDA or somebody in the US. We actually used a service to help us with all the paperwork. But that last couple weeks of getting all these things done leading up to the flight was super stressful, because we didn't want to get to the airport on the day that we were leaving with our house sold, nothing left, and not be able to get our animals on the plane. So it was very just on our minds to make sure we did everything right. And that was just an extra bunch of steps in order to make sure that they could be here with us. And they made it, and they flew on the plane with us, and they were pissed at us when we got here. Our cat basically sat in his crate and stared at the other way and wouldn't even get out of it for a while after we got here. But all of them really, really loved Denmark in the end. Unfortunately, over time, we were here for a couple years. One was old, one passed away unexpectedly, and then the cat was 19 years old. He passed away, so they're not with us now, but it was a really good time for them, actually. I felt like even the cat really opened up a little bit to Denmark. For whatever reason, he seemed to like it here more than he liked it back home. But the ordeal of bringing them here, just the memory of... Basically, the other thing that was interesting is we had to rent a van to get all the animals and our luggage to the airport, because you couldn't just go in a taxi or an Uber. And then I rented a van for a day, got them all there, dropped the van off. Then I had to rent a van here in Denmark just so I can get them all to our house. So I felt like I became the ultimate project manager, being able to make sure all these things went flawlessly, and it all worked out very, very well.
I had to get rid of a lot of things. I think we took 20 trips to Goodwill before we moved. Just taking piles and piles of clothes and random stuff around the house. We got rid of my bed, which I'm still a little sad about. just like so much stuff. I've like the pictures of our house when it was up for sale are like still on Google, and when I show my friends what my house used to look like, I have to explain that like it didn't look like that all the time, because in all the pictures when it was up for sale, there's like nothing in the house. It's so blank.
I think the process of moving abroad is not really something that people really think about. If you know, it doesn't have to be coming to Denmark, it could be going to anywhere, but just the whole process of moving is such a huge undertaking, because if you're moving domestically, then you're just kind of, you know, packing up your house and moving from one state to another, or just one city to another. But when you're moving abroad, you have to calculate how much all of your belongings weigh, because you have to pay per pound when you ship it. And it goes on a huge shipping container, and you don't see your things for, you know, 7-8 weeks. And just like getting your pets over, getting your kids over, it's just, and then doing everything in a completely different language. It's not at all easy, and I think it sounds so fabulous and we romanticize it, but logistically it's a nightmare to get over to a new country and actually move here.
We had to organize everything on that end on our own. But luckily for me, my work arranged everything on this side. So they applied for the visa. When we came to visit to find a place to stay, they helped us find places to rent, and they took us on tours of a few places. They also made sure while we were here that we can get our visa stuff taken care of, our fingerprints and all that stuff. So everything was a bit simpler on this end, because that was just a condition of my job. And that was one of the things that I required as part of me moving here. And so thankfully we didn't have to deal with those logistics very much, because it's not super easy. And if I didn't have that help the first time we got here, it would have been extremely difficult to know where to live, what I should pay for rent, how do you actually, get a house situated with your address and what's called the CPR number. All these different little pieces that are necessary to be able to live here would have been really, really hard if I didn't have somebody helping me guide us through the first steps of the process.
One of the most difficult things that we had to figure out, besides our visas, was actually my schooling, because the schooling here in Denmark is considerably different than it is in the US. And I remember calling gymnasiums, because that's kind of their high school here, calling gymnasiums because she was about to go into high school. And so I just assumed that that's where she would be going. And I called, I think, maybe 2 or 3 gymnasiums. And they were all like, she's too young, and she needs to be in folk school. And so I finally figured out that they go to school much later, and they get out of elementary school much later. So she did need to be in folk school. But then it was like, okay, how do we find her a school that has a language program where she can learn the language? Or do we send her to an international school? And can we even afford an international school? Because there's only a couple international schools here in Copenhagen, and the one big one is incredibly expensive. And so it was kind of making that decision, like, we can't really afford to send her to an international school. Can she survive going to a folk school? If she goes to a folk school, can we find her one that has an international program where she can learn Danish, and how is she going to fit in with all the kids? And as a parent, it was really nerve-wracking, because you realize that you're kind of uprooting your child at this really major transition point in her life, going into high school, and we basically just turned her life upside down in so many ways. And it's just like you're trying to make the next best decision, and you just hope for the best.
Well, I thought that school was going to be a lot different than it ended up being. So I remember buying a bunch of AP math and AP science books that I did not end up using. And I remember I was super excited to visit all these schools, it just turned out like it's a lot different than American school, and I wasn't expecting that. Just the way the classes work, like in folk school, which is like elementary school, you have one class that you're with all day, all year long, and everybody's been in that exact class since like kindergarten, and it's only like 20 people, and you stay in the same classroom all day long. So that is a lot different, and I definitely had to get used to that.
We were obviously very concerned about Maya. Not concerned, but we wanted to make sure that she was getting the most out of everything and not doing this just because we wanted to. This was an experience we wanted her to have. So it was critical that she was a part of the process of moving. So every time that we came as a family, she was with us. We had to plan one of the trips during her spring break in order to find the place to live, because I didn't want to come and do that by myself. I wanted everybody to be there, be here with me. Especially Maya, because she had to be kind of part of the decisions as we moved here, so she wouldn't feel like it was something that was forced on her. And we were really happy when she decided to go to public school. That way we knew she could learn Danish, although I know it was extremely challenging. She knows far more than any of us do. One of the problems as an English speaker in Denmark is everybody speaks English, so you're never motivated to learn Danish, and everything in my work is in English. So I've not made very much progress at all, despite being here 2.5 years. But we're going to start taking lessons now, because in order to get permanent residency, you need to be able to pass Danish language exams, and that's important for us if we want to stay here. So we decided to actually dedicate more time to learning Danish now so that we can stay. But I don't think I would have felt comfortable taking those tests right after arriving, because there was so much other stuff to figure out. With paying bills, and how much money was I making, and how much did it cost to buy food, and how to build a budget in a place that I knew nothing about, a place that cost of living was so different than what I was used to. So I really needed that 1.5 years to just kind of settle and understand what everything was about. If I tried to introduce language on top of all that and a new job, it would have been extremely stressful, and I don't think I would have done a very good job at it. So now we're settled, and I feel far more comfortable dedicating time to be able to actually focus a bit on the language.
When we moved here, I thought that it would be easy to get a job, because so many people had told me, oh, it's easy, you can get a job right away, there's so many places that speak English, it's so easy. And I had promised myself I would take the first couple months just to adjust, which I'm glad I did, because we ended up having some health issues with our dogs, and just there was a lot of stuff going on with Maya and her transitioning here, and it was good to kind of have that first 6 months to not really think about it. But then I really started looking for a job, and I got absolute crickets. I applied to probably 40 jobs and heard absolutely nothing from anyone. Or if I did hear something, then it was a rejection. I even got rejected from taking care of bunnies at a children's zoo. So that was like a really low point. Like, I couldn't even get a job taking care of rabbits. So it was really difficult, and it was hard for me because I've always worked, and I've always prided myself on working, and I'm somebody who likes to be doing something all the time. And so it was difficult because I felt really guilty. I felt like I was a money drain because I wasn't working, and so that was hard. So I really, really wanted to find something, and that really kind of put me into a depression at one point because I just couldn't find anything.
Well, it was really hard because I think it was like especially harder for me since I'm so much older. Like I was 14 when we came here, and everyone was, like I said before, everyone in my class had already been together since they were like, 6. So they all knew each other, and they all had their little groups, and it was kind of hard to get into those groups when everybody already knew each other. And I mean, especially being an American who didn't really know that much Danish at the time, it was definitely hard.
Making friends here is interesting. I actually don't, I've made a couple friends. I have one really good friend that I get together with, and we go out to exhibits and we do miniatures together, and I really love hanging out with her because she and I have very similar personalities. But outside of her, I really haven't made too many friends, but I also had a very strong network of online friends from back in the US, because I had been in several online groups. We used to have a coonhound, so I had joined this online group for people who owned coonhounds in urban settings. And so I did have a pretty strong network of friends online that I could turn to. So it's never really bothered me, I think, as much as other people that I haven't made friends, because I still have my friends that are online.
I think, like, especially at school, I mean, being in a class with a bunch of teenagers and coming from a country that has such, like, an impact on the world with culture and media and everything, people are always so interested. I feel like teenagers are always really interested that I'm from America, like, oh, where are you from? Oh, wow, a big city. Is that like New York and stuff? Do you have you ever met any celebrities or anything? They're just like super interested. And especially now going to like after school, where it's like boarding school, where it's like just a giant house with a bunch of teenagers, I feel like kind of like a celebrity, because everyone's always so interested in me.
It was interesting in that we had to change all of our money and our bank accounts and everything. So that was kind of a big transition. We kept some of our accounts in the US, and I worked with a financial advisor to figure out the right ways to limit our tax obligation with the money that we had in the US, while still being able to maintain my 401k and all that, while also setting up bank accounts here to start kind of building some equity here in Denmark. So that was a bit of a process to learn how to kind of work in a different financial system, pay bills differently, manage money differently, while also still having things in the US and trying to ensure that we weren't, having tax issues. So there's a lot to deal with on the tax front when you move and you still have things back in the US. But that was one of the reasons why we decided to sell our house, so that we wouldn't have to worry about income from a house and those extra kind of tax issues that would come from keeping something from home. Because when we first moved here, we didn't know how long we'd stay, and it certainly could have been possible that we moved back, and it might have been better to have a house still, but we decided it was best to just get rid of everything. And if we moved back to the US, we'd start over again, and it would limit our obligation to pay taxes here, which can be super complicated when you have kind of two different countries that you're maintaining assets in. So that was a factor when we were kind of going through the transition to be here, and it took a little while to figure all that out.
I think like the hardest thing to adjust to was that like realizing that all of that stuff that I had in the US like wasn't here anymore. Like I couldn't see my friends every day, and I wouldn't go back to my school or anything. Like that was something that I didn't even like fully like set in until like a month after we got here, and that was definitely really hard. And that made things a lot harder at school, because every day I just like wished I was back with my friends and starting high school and everything. But after a while it got better, because it was like, I'm doing new things and living my own life over here, and they're doing things over there, and we just like share about each other's lives. It was really hard to get used to like the drinking culture, definitely. I was not ready to, I don't think at like 14 years old I was ready to be pushed into the world of alcohol and people smoking around me all the time, but over time I just got used to it. But it was definitely very strange to go from like, just middle school, people drinking like Monster Energy, to people drinking like Smirnoff Ice during their lunch breaks. It was a lot different. I mean, one of the things that I didn't really think about before I left was how like safe I felt at school and everything. Like in America, especially towards the end in 2018, things got kind of scary. But then like I got to Denmark, and the doors to the school were always unlocked, and like everybody was so chill. Like I felt a lot safer in Danish school than I was in American school, and I didn't really expect that.
I'd say the hardest thing to adjust to in the work environment to being here is that it's culturally, it's just a little bit different than back home. I think it's different in every European country. I've worked in France, I've worked in the Netherlands, I worked here in Denmark, I've been to Sweden for work, in Germany, and the UK. They're all very different. But in Denmark, what was challenging is I don't think that Danes feel as comfortable being open and upfront about things and confrontational. They try to avoid confrontation, which means you often have to be willing to read between the lines to understand what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And that's really difficult culturally when you don't even understand all the same kind of body language and all the same things that people say, or humor and all that stuff that maybe in your own culture you can interpret as meaning something, but here you misinterpret everything because it's just culturally so different. So it was a big adjustment at work in my first job because it was primarily Danes, not very international. I was one of the few internationals there, and I felt like that was just more difficult than I thought it would be, and that was a huge adjustment. The job that I'm at now is a little bit different. It's actually extremely international, and it feels a bit more like what I'm used to before I came here. So I feel a lot more comfortable, but it is a little bit different how management works and how people work, and there's this concept of having to be responsible for yourself, and sometimes that means even finding out things that you didn't know that you needed to know, but yet you're expected to know, and it's just a little bit different.
Shopping here is interesting. You always kind of see in the movies the quaint people who like shop every day, and you think, oh, that's so cute. And it turns out I do tend to shop every day because our refrigerator is really small, so you can't fit as much stuff in it, so you need to shop more often and buy less things. And also it's just so easy. It's so much easier to get to the grocery store because there's grocery stores, it feels like every 10 feet here in the Copenhagen area. And so I'm always close to one. There's one right next to our train station. So I literally just get off the train and I can go in the grocery store and pick up things for dinner. So that's been a huge change. The ability to get around and not need a car to do errands has been a huge change. Living in this house, I can walk to a grocery store, I can walk to a mall, I can walk to the train station and get downtown. We could very easily live without a car. But that's such a huge change from the US, where I feel like you had to have a car everywhere you went. So that I think that kind of changes your shopping habits a bit.
I think there's so many things that like as an American just feel so normal to me, especially like food, that to Danish people it's like, what are you talking about? That's so weird. Like, having a lot of my family be from the South in the US, I've talked about some of my favorite things like chicken and waffles, and Danish people are like, that sounds disgusting, that's so gross. I'm like, excuse me, that's chicken and waffles. But then that's just like, something I grew up on, and then, or not really grew up on, but really used to. And then looking at all this Danish things, and I'm like, wow, that's just something that they grew up on. So that's, definitely different, and different views on things like that.
Sports has been a difficult thing to adjust to because I'm a baseball fan, and basically only Sundays are games that I could watch because they're day games in the US, so they're on at night here. But my Washington Nationals won the World Series last year, and I stayed up and watched all of those games throughout all of October at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I basically didn't sleep. I just started a new job on October 1st, and everybody at my job thought I was insane, and they didn't understand why I was coming in extremely tired every day because I was staying up watching every single one of those games. It was worth it, but it does make watching sports really difficult. But that's one of the reasons why the NFL is probably one of the more popular sports here in Denmark, because those are typically day games on Sundays, which makes it easy for Danes to watch it live. But all the other sports that are at night in the US, it's super hard to watch. That's been a bummer.
Probably one of the more frustrating things that I've experienced is my inability to learn Danish well. I can read it, and I can write emails and things like that, but as somebody who's always picked up languages really quickly, it is incredibly frustrating to me that I can't pick up Danish quickly. The pronunciation is very difficult. They have sounds that physically don't exist in English. It's not even that it's like a new sound, it's like a new way of moving your mouth. And it doesn't exist in English. And it's so hard to learn that. And then there's so much subtlety in the language that There's cooling and killing, and if you say the wrong thing, it, like, Danes look at you like you have 3 heads, and it's just like really difficult to get past that. Just especially when you try to say something in Danish and people literally have no idea what you just said. It makes it really hard to push yourself to speak Danish, because you're just like, okay, it's just easier to say it in English.
I mentioned not learning too much Danish, but I think it's important to mention the few words that I have learned, like flæskesteg, now I can't even say it, flæskesteg sandwich, which is a pork sandwich, which is, you come visit and I will take you to get some. It's super good. That's one of my favorite things. And hindbærsnitte, which is like a raspberry Pop-Tart. I've Googled, and apparently that's not really where Pop-Tarts came from, but they're almost like Pop-Tarts, except like amazing and not kind of cardboardy things wrapped in little like foil stuff that you buy in a store that's probably been sitting on the shelf for months. They're freshly baked, they're amazing. But just like Danes, it's very traditional that there's basically only raspberry flavored, unlike Pop-Tarts where there's 35 different flavors. It's just raspberry every time, but it's so good, it's so good. And those are the first words I learned, was basically food that I liked. And then I learned how to say a few street names and city names, but even then I get it maybe 80% accurate. It's pretty tough. It's a very difficult language. It's funny because Danes seem to be frustrated if you don't say things properly, but that same person will also admit that their language is extremely difficult to pronounce and learn. So they recognize that, but then they also want to make sure if you're saying it, you say it really well. They don't want you to butcher it. So it's a little catch-22 and a very difficult thing to learn because of that.
I really want to stay here because, I mean, like, I've built my life here now. I mean, we've only been here for 2 years, but I've been going through their school for 2 years. I have a boyfriend now. I have my own little life here, and I would really, like, suck to go back home after all of this and, like, spend so much time adjusting to being here and being okay and fine with living here, and then having to just give it all up and go back. Also, I've learned 2 years of Danish now, and that would be for nothing if we went back, so.
Comparing Denmark to America, I hesitate to tell people this, but it is actually true. I actually much prefer living in Denmark than I did in the US. I just feel more like myself here. I feel like my personality fits in with Danes a lot more than it did back in the US. And I just like that the life here is, to me, so much more quiet. And it's a lot more complex in so many ways, but it's a lot more simple. I think your daily life is quite a bit more simple, and they just enjoy, being around friends and having a dinner at home and hanging out. And I think people kind of commercialize this idea of hygge and make it into candles and blankets and all these cute, crate and barrel kind of scenes, but true hygge is actually just being with your friends or just being with yourself and just being, just soaking in the moment, and I really, really appreciate that about Danish life.
Visa stuff with us is like super complicated. Right now we're on a work visa through my dad, but it's really complicated for me because there's so many like rules and obstacles I have to get through to even just like be here on my own. I can live here, I guess for a while, but I have to live with my parents until I graduate university. So I'll be like in my early 20s, and it's pretty hard, and the idea of living with my parents, no offense. But yeah, there's like a bunch of obstacles I have to go through, and it's definitely a lot easier if you come here when you're like a kid, because there's the rule where if you have lived here for 8 years, by the time you're 18 you get like special rules, but I'm not cool enough for that, so don't get that. I have to go through all these complicated things to live here.
At the moment, we're here on my work visa, and that means that the visa's under my name, and Miranda and Maya are both accompanying me as part of my visa. Miranda has a job now, so she technically could get her own visa, but we think it'd be easier to just kind of keep it together because then the timing of renewals are all the same and it just simplifies things for the moment. But eventually we'll be able to get permanent residency. We'll meet those requirements in a couple of years as long as we pass the Danish language tests and the culture exam. And that's certainly our plan, is to be able to get permanent residency at least. And then it doesn't matter where my job is. I can change jobs. It's a bit more, fluid. But right now on my residency card, it specifically says my employer, and it's for a specific duration of time. They can renew when that time is expired. They don't do them for more than 4 years. So after 4 years, they can just renew it again. But it is, a little difficult to feel comfortable doing things like buying property, for example, because I don't have that level of kind of permanent feeling or just confidence that no matter what, I can be here, everything's fine. So we're continuing to rent for the moment, but we're hoping that we can get permanent residency to make it easier to be able to buy a place in the future, and that's certainly on our path. But for the time being, we just have work visas for myself, and through the accompanying visa, Miranda and Maya both could work if they wanted to, and Miranda is, and Maya's of course in school. But it's interesting to learn what it takes to be an immigrant somewhere, and you certainly have more empathy towards people that have been immigrants in other countries that have had to deal with far more difficult things than we've had to deal with, and just the little bits we've had to deal with have introduced challenges we didn't expect in terms of navigating the system and navigating the language and how to be accepted and all those things that were a little bit more difficult than we thought it would be. And I can't imagine what it'd be like for people that don't have the advantages that we have. So we've been very, very lucky.
I don't hate my parents for moving here. It's not, I had a lot of difficulties when I first got here, but that's not anything that they caused. It's not their fault or anything. It's just, big changes happening in this part of my life there's already a lot of changes in, and big things are happening when you're a teenager. And so moving here during that time was definitely really hard, but I don't blame my parents or anything.
I think one thing that I would want people to understand is that it is incredibly difficult to move here. I think people have this idea that it's super easy to just pick up and move to Europe and live here, and sure, you can come and live for 3 months and maybe you can do a backpacking trip or something, but to actually come and live here and emigrate to a country is such a different beast, and it's so much more complex. It is so much more strict. The immigration laws here are incredibly strict, and I think people don't realize that countries do say, you need to have a certain level of education, you need to have a certain level of income, you need to be able to support your entire family if you move here for a job. You can't come here if you've been on, if you've gotten disability or something like that. There's all these rules that you don't realize exist, and it makes it very, very difficult to get in. I think we had an easy time getting in, but even people who come here because they've married a Dane have incredibly difficult times being able to stay, and they're married to a Danish person. So I think the biggest thing that I would tell people is don't assume that it is easy to move here, because it's not.
Prepare yourself, because things are going to be probably a lot harder than you expected them to be, and it's not going to be exactly how things were back home. And just push yourself to go out with other people, even if you feel like you're not ready to go out and be with people. If you're scared or nervous and you just want to be alone, just go out and meet people, because eventually it'll be worth it and you'll be happy and have friends.